A lot of people say that their approach to life is scientific, as distinct from metaphysical, and that metaphysics is bosh anyway. But everybody, by virtue of being a human being, is willy-nilly a metaphysician. That is to say, everybody starts from certain fundamental assumptions as to what is the good life, what he wants, what are his, shall we say, axioms for living.
I'm doing one takes. Fuck this shit. Cool up. Now, before we have this conversation, it's important to understand why is it that we're having this conversation in the first place. The way in which we perceive ourselves is at the root of a lot of the decisions that we take. It's a lot at the root of, I hope I'm fucking with, okay, here you go. It's at the root of the decisions. It's at the root of a lot of decisions that we take. It's at the root of our moral intuitions. It's at the rules of it's at the root of the laws that we place. It's at the root of how we perceive our agency and therefore the actions that we take. And it's not some sort of like conceptual, high armchair philosopher type of thing. It's something that boils down to sort of the basis of our experience. Like we feel like we're selves. There's something that matches this concept. There's this feeling behind it. And the philosopher Jay Garfield, a lot of what I'm about to say is about to be something derivative of what Jay Garfield has said. In a series of books called Losing Ourselves and Engaging Buddhism, he has in Losing Ourselves sort of an analogy or a thought experiment that's made to sort of show what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about the self. Basically, the thought experiment goes like this. You're supposed to imagine what it's like to have the body of someone else, all the while remaining yourself. Let's say, for example, you're a bodybuilder, you're into like the latest shit, you're like Chris Bumstead, you imagine yourself, but like with the body of Chris Bumstead, you feel nice, you're Mr. Olympia, right? Well, that's something I think is at the very easy for a lot of people to do due to a lot of sort of the insecurities that we tend to have. And I think it's a wish that a lot of us have formed at some point and found no difficulty in forming it. And what that wish is supposed to show is that we all, how easy it is and how easy it is for us to think about taking the identity of someone else all the while remaining ourselves. I think it reflects the fact that at the very least, pre-reflectively, before we start thinking about it, we all more or less think ourselves to be something other than our bodies. And that's sort of what the self-perspective sort of is. Now, as I'm about to talk about it, the self is a topic with at least a millennia or more of philosophers giving their inputs on it. Probably will not be building a picture that a lot of philosophers will agree with, but I'm going to stick with some properties that I think, how can I put this, are relevant to the conversation or matches what this feeling seems like to us. And the self, its main properties, at least to me, are that the self is unitary, the self is a precursor, and it extends and is across all of our experiences, and the self has free will. Now, what does that mean? Unitary in the sense that we don't feel like we're sharing sort of our experience with anyone else. We feel like we're fully capable within our own bodies. There's nothing contradicting us. There's nothing preventing us from doing anything. You don't feel like there's like a split, there's not a concordance. Like who we are is not a multitude of things getting together to form a single entity, but we are at least one, indivisible, right? The self is a precursor and exists across all of our experiences. This is something that actually solves a lot of issues regarding personal identity and sort of like the nature of a conscious experience. In the sense that when you open your eyes, you see the world coming in. And so even if you were never to see your eyes, you could imagine that you have something that helps you see. And kind of the same way, we have conscious experiences, and therefore we have to imagine that there's a conscious experiencer for when the experience happens. And that also resolves the identity, the issue of identity, in the sense that as we age, our minds and bodies change. And so there's an issue of how is it that we remain the same person throughout all moments in time. This is how we solve this sort of issue. By imagining that who we are is something that holds or possesses both the mind and body, but it's not something that is identical to it. And the last thing is free will, in the sense that we don't feel like there's anything preventing us from making a decision and sort of sticking to it. I mean, granted, for sure, like you're not in prison or someone's like holding you. If all these things are not happening, then what? So like I'm kind of too close on the camera. Hold up. Ah, here you go. Where if these things don't happen, then you feel like you have complete volition in your body, and nothing is there to stop you from doing anything that you're doing. A Buddhist philosopher by the name of Karl Kirti examined the possibility of us to be selves, and he did so with sort of the relationships it could have with the psychophysical processes. The psychophysical processes means the things that underlie our conscious experiences. Our conscious experiences are what we are. My thoughts, perceptions, and my reflections on them, and the entire complex of what makes my consciousness possible, and what it encompasses the entirety of who I am. And so, whatever the self must look like, it must have a relationship with these psychophysical processes. There are seven there's seven branches to the sevenfold analysis by the Karl Kirti, but I don't think I need to get into the other four. Three will do just fine. So, the three possible way in which the self can have a relationship with our psychophysical processes is that the self is identical to one, or is identical to all of them, or it possesses them or has a relationship to them that is incomprehensible. And we can sort of imagine how plausible it would be when we start asking ourselves these sort of questions. For example, if the self is identical to only one of our psychophysical processes, then we'll be leaving out a lot of what makes our experience possible, which makes it unlikely. Like, for example, how likely is it that you're your thoughts, but you're not your emotions, or you're your emotions, but you're not your capacity for movement or perception, right? Unlikely. So how likely then is a self if it's something that was identical to all of our psychophysical processes? That also is something that's unlikely in the sense that, as I've said, the self is unitary. We feel like we're a unitary agent. And so we can see how that sort of picture starts to crumble. We're considered sort of like bare human experiences, like telling yourself that you're going to be cutting a specific amount of weight by March when January rolls up as a sort of New Year's resolution. And by sort of like week one, you find yourself incapable of sticking with the things that you told yourself, because you find yourself eating a cookie when you told yourself that you were not going to do that. Pre-think of ourselves as this sort of unitary agent that has free will, that exists in all moments of our experience. How likely is it for us to have these sort of mishaps in our capacity for agency and sticking with things from moment to moment? Like, as I say, right, when you open your eyes, you're capable of seeing. It's a direct function of having well-functioning eyes. So if you're the self that is unitary, exists in all moments of your experience, and has free will, how come you're not capable of sticking with something from moment to moment? What sense does it make to think of ourselves as unitary when we're not capable of sticking with something that we told ourselves to? What sense does it make for us to have contradictory goals as unitary agent? And we can push this to the extreme, and like cases where people have like a lung cancer, but yet they keep smoking because they're incapable of like stopping themselves. It's like it's stronger than them. How they're doing an action that is stronger than themselves that they're capable of stopping. What sense does it make for us to think of ourselves as a unitary agent in cases such as that one? And unlikely, even if the self was something that was real, it's unlikely it's not something that has the level of agency that we think. Probably not, doesn't have free will, or in all likelihood is unitary, or it doesn't exist in all moments of our experiences. Like, something needs to drop for this thing to make sense. The other thing is that the self could be something that possesses our psychophysical processes, but that also is unlikely. As I said, like the entirety of a complex of the entire complex of psychophysical processes are the things that instantiate our conscious experience, and these are the things that make up our identity. If we're not talking about these things, then in all likelihood we're talking about fiction of our imagination. In the Buddhist tradition, the self is often said to be illusory, in the sense that it appears in one way, but exists actually in another. The reason for why we should think that is because our conscious experience often lies to us as to like sort of interaction with reality and the information that we sort of perceive, right? The argument for why the self would be illusory would go like this. All this is merely consciousness because all apparent intentional objects are non-existent. This is a quote of Vasubandhu. And he's not saying here that the reality itself doesn't exist, but just saying that whatever we perceive of reality, we know, for example, that as soon as light hits our retina, that we're not, then that information processes and goes into our brain. From that point on, what we're dealing with is not even light anymore. We're dealing with with something like a fabrication of our brain, and we get this feeling that we're in direct contact with reality. And it's in this way that our experience is illusory. We get the feeling, we feel like we're in direct contact with reality, but we're introspect and think as to what must be going on. You realize that it's really not the case. Quote number 2. The manifest perceptible characteristics of things are not simply features of those things themselves. That's a lot of words. But rise to the interactions with objects with the particular kind of subjectivity of the subject experiencing them. J. Garfield. The reality we experience is a reality that arises out of the interplay between the capacity of our senses to pick up the objects and their properties, and the capacity of our nervous system to represent them to ourselves. And so the reality we experience is not reality itself, but representation of reality. We know, for example, that cats and dogs are capable of representing the world in ways that we're capable of. They're capable of representing the world in terms of smells and sounds that we don't pick up. Bees are capable of picking up spectrums of light. So when they look at flowers, we look at flowers and see some, but they see something completely different. Every flower so looks different to them. So not only does our conscious experience lies to us when we feel that we're in direct contact with reality, but much of what reality could be, we don't have access to, nor do we have any idea. Which brings us to number 3. Perception, at least for ordinary beings, is problematic on a Buddhist account. For all it may in principle be veridical, in practice, it delivers data that are affected by the imperfections of our sensory organs. And on this account, the mind, like external objects, always is, at least to some degree, hidden to us. The argument for why the self could be is really goes like this. If everything we know arises to our conscious experiences, and consciousness constantly lies to us as to what it is that we're experiencing, and how it actually appears, then why should we trust it to actually give us a good picture of what's going on in the interior world, what's going on in our own minds? And all likely, this feeling that we have of being self is probably something that is as illusory as the feeling that we have of being in direct contact with reality. Terminology about what we are as persons. And to understand what persons are, it's important to understand how the Buddhists perceive a deity. Now, the self perspective could be said to be an essentialist perspective in which there is something intrinsically about something that makes it what it is. If I talk to you as to what makes a car, you'll probably point out the car itself, and then say, steering wheel, wheels, clutch, gas pedal, etc., right? These are the things that make a car what a car is. But a Buddhist perspective as to identity is a non-essentialist perspective. I'm slurring my words because it's cold. Non-essentialist perspective. Non-essentialist in the sense that they don't think there's anything about something that inherently makes it what it is. In fact, they say that things are empty of an intrinsic existence because when we acquire, golly, I don't like using words like that. Why not? You know what? When we inquire as to the reasons behind, how they appear in the way they do, what makes them what they are, we find ourselves unraveling a sort of a web in which they appear as a set of condition of other things that have nothing to do with these things themselves. I just said a bunch of shit. Like, let me tune in. Let me tap in. Let me explain what I mean. There are 3 sorts of interdependence within the Buddhist tradition. There's causal dependency, mereological dependency, and dependency upon conceptual reputation. Causal dependency is a sort of dependency of this that happened and therefore that happened. For example, in the case of that car, right? Okay, I'm recording. In the case of that car, the conditions for why the car appeared in the way that it does could have a lot of things to do with nothing about the car itself. For example, it could have something to do with the marketing team and the demographic that they were thinking about targeting when they build the car. It will have something to do with the designer of the car itself and what he thinks a car should look like. What that car is capable of, how fast it goes, and how long it lasts, It's gonna have something to do with the engineering, the parts that are put into the car, etc., right? Meteorological dependency is dependency that parts have on their holes, but holes also have on their parts. For example, in the case of that same car, that car is dependent upon wheels, steering wheel, wheels, all the different parts that come into it to be able to be a car and function as a car. Whereas the steering wheel and a wheel and all these other parts all need to feature within the car in some way or another to be able to be the objects that have the identity that they do, and not just some random pieces of plastic and metal. Dependency upon conceptual reputation is a different sort of, it's more complex. On one hand, it's dependency upon conceptual reputation means that things appear in the way that they do. Reality appears in the way that it does, because we have the sensory systems that we have, the sensory apparatuses that we have the nervous systems that we do, and so we represent the way in which that is typical for us to represent it, because we have the senses and nervous systems that we have. It also takes another dimension in the sense that we are beings that are capable of representing the world in terms of concepts. If I tell you a Toyota, a Mercedes, or a Lamborghini, we will all have a different idea. We will all have a similar idea as to the status that all of these cars sort of give on to their bearers and the people that buy them and the people that are capable of buying them. One aspect of the answer probably lies in the fact that undoubtedly they're more expensive cars that have more expensive parts in them, and then there's manufacturing is more intricate, etc., raising the price, raising the value. But even the recognition behind the different factors that come into these cars as a source for why they inherently are more status given is something that we build together. In one way or another, things arise out of the social things to us. Things to us arise in a way that they do because we give them the identity that they have. In the same way, our identity is constituted of the social web that we create. Like when I think about myself and the things that make me what I am, I think about the way in which I am Black, sort of a social concept that is different. For example, how a Nigerian person might be Black, or an African American from the States might be Black. I'm Black in a Haitian way, and that means it's something different that all these different types of Blackness mean. I'm also like not Asian, but like these. But it's relevant in the sense that what the ideas are behind these traditions make up the different sort of people and different sort of identities. What it means to be Black is codependent upon what it means to be Asian, what it means to be white, what it means to be Latino. And our existence or identity sort of arises off of these factors. Even when you reason about yourself and decide to make changes to your lives, you're doing so with language, right? Language is a tool that also shapes thought, and that you don't learn without also the culture that it brings. And so you're more likely to make you're more likely to come upon certain paths of thinking, make certain changes just out of the reflection of the language that you speak. And I think that is a very sort of different sort of juxtaposition beyond what it means to be yourself, to be the sort of agent that has nothing to do with the world, but that is capable of interacting with it. Whereas this sort of person perspective sees us as these beings that arise out of a set of physical causes and condition, but also conceptual ones. And that should give us pause to reflect. Because when we see ourselves like that, what we find is that if we have lives that are fulfilling, lives that we judge to be good, we have to think the sort of causes and conditions that led us to be able to express good lives, fulfilling lives. Whereas people that often tend to not have the same changes that we do, tend to have different sets of causes and conditions that lead them to live the lives that they do. And one notes I have on this video, and I have peace written as Piece, So yeah, don't let the philosophy fool you, nigga. I am sort of retarded. Anyway, it's important also that I state, well, now that we're at the end of the video, it's important that I point out that there's a lot about Buddhism that I did not speak about. Buddhism is a tradition encompassing tons of different paths, tons of different schools. It also has before it's at least before Jesus, it's at least like 500 years. And if you count the fact that it has a history upon the Indian tradition, that's a couple more centuries. So, it's a philosophy with millennia of conversations and thought, right? It's also important that I point out that this channel will not be solely about Buddhism. I will speak about it when it's relevant. For example, I think I would want to do like a piece on Zen and Chan Buddhism and what that has to offer. And I really do see how this could all seem like very fruitful. Like, I don't know. I like to take knowledge and wisdom from whoever is willing to give it. And since I like to be a lot in the Western philosophy, I've been really surprised to see like the level of like wisdom and depth there is in the Eastern traditions. And since this is not a topic that's often talked about, I'm here to talk about it. I think my next video is going to be about like agency and how, from like a more scientific perspective, ideas not fully fleshed out yet, but give your boy a like and a follow, and hopefully you'll be there. I'll make it and you'll be there to see it. It's also important that I point out that this, of course, is for anyone interested in having a conversation as to how to live well. But I'll mostly be speaking to people my age, Gen Z, right? I'm 23 years old, though I may not look like it. And I do feel like we often get a bad rep. I'm not gonna lie, I'm on the internet with you niggas. Some of that bad rep is well deserved. Some of y'all is confused. Well, I don't think that's necessarily our fault, We're a generation that is finding our way to the world. And the context that's unfamiliar for most of our ancestors, right? Like, we're about to be confused. We're the first ones dealing with this shit. Well, I think there's a lot of untapped potential within ourselves, and the fact that, well, number one, I think there's like a sort of symbolism behind the fact that we are people that are born sort of in the return of a new millennium, right? So, where's the fucking Mr. Mike? Yeah, we're people that are born at the dawn of a millennium. That doesn't happen very often, It happens exactly every 1,000 years. And I think there's a symbolism behind that, and the fact that we can represent sort of like a new tide for humanity and give like history like a new pivot. Most of our ancestors have been so concerned with just like pure survival that we've sort of been born in a society that I don't think that's been given much thought as to how it should function. But I think since we are fortunate enough to not be as concerned, at least most of us are not as concerned with the question of survival, we can ask ourselves more questions as to what does it mean to live well, what sort of society should we build, et cetera, these questions such as these ones. And I think what we can do is we can live fulfilling lives, build societies that we are proud to live in. And at our deaths, we can live our descendants a society that we're proud to leave them. But I think this all starts with conversation. And that's what I'm here to do. One more time, my name's Nancy. Give me a like and follow. Follow me on IG. Peace.